warfare in the ancient world, folks. You have chosen the adventure of Ajax, written by Sophocles, performed in 440 BCE. If you do not want to sign up for the play that is about suicide and a whole constellation of other issues that come with it, this isn't the one for you. Exactly. Go on to the Persians. But if you meant to read the Ajax, welcome! Here's some information that is going to help Ajax make a little bit more sense, starting with this here slide. This is a family tree of Ajax's immediate family. Most of these characters are either going to appear or be brought up, so it's important to have this for reference, just so you can keep track of who's talking to who and why. So, Telamon is the father of two heroes at Troy, Ajax and Teucer, or Teucros. Sometimes you'll see the name that way. Both of them are from the island of Salamis, which you may remember from last unit as the island where the Athenians and their allies made their last stand against the Persians by sea, and thus drove back the Persian advance. Very exciting for Athens. So, in the Trojan War, then, this mythological past, the closest thing that Athens has to a hometown hero is Ajax, and Teucer a little bit as well. You'll notice that he's a cousin to Achilles. So Ajax's dad is brothers to Achilles' dad. So they're first cousins. And all of these folks are at Troy together. Our action takes place near the end, but before Troy is finally sacked, so this is pre-horse. You'll also notice that Odysseus is not in this family. That is important because of the drama that happens later. And this is essentially about battlefield drama that spirals out of control and sends Ajax into a spiral of despair and anger and self-destruction. It's a really sad and difficult play to read, but also a really interesting one. So, Athena, just to make sure we're all on the same page here, is a goddess. She's the goddess of wisdom and strategy and warfare, and she is tight with Odysseus. They are buddies. They spend most of the Odyssey helping each other out of situations, mostly Athena helping Odysseus. And at the beginning of this play, she shows up to have a conversation with Odysseus about the action underway. More about that in a bit. But it's important to point out, Athena is the patron goddess of Athens, which is right next to Salamis. Okay, so the patron goddess of Athens is siding not with the dude from Salamis, Ajax, but with Odysseus. He and Ajax do not get along very well. That's going to be important for later. Okay. 440 BCE. This is before the Peloponnesian War breaks out officially. There were some early hostilities between Athens and Sparta that do result in combat, but it's kind of a Cold War situation at this point. Sophocles, like Athenian citizen males in general, was a veteran. He had served as probably a hoplite in the military. And there are some who read this play as a play about veterans' experiences returning to home after combat and their tensions with marrying civilian life to military life. Opinions on this are divided a bit, so I'm going to go with a neutral, open-ended kind of reading for this, and then you can relate to what you relate to. All right. Before this play takes place, and this is something the audience would already know about. For us, it's going to feel like we've been dropped into the middle of this thing without a map, except for this. This is your map. But ancient audiences already knew the plot. They know how this ends. They know that Ajax and Achilles have this relationship, that Odysseus and Achilles and Ajax don't get along. And they also know that Achilles dies before Troy is sacked. So Achilles, you may remember him from Sage as the best of the Achaeans. I made you pretend to be one of his soldiers in an essay question, so you should remember this guy. He was the leader of the Myrmidons and a particularly talented warrior, so much so that when he boycotts the Greek army for a while, the Greeks really do very poorly, and they need to come to him and beg him to come back, which eventually he does for reasons. But when he does so, he knows that he has effectively chosen to die himself. He has a choice of fates. He can either go home and die an obscure death, or stay at Troy and be famous forever but die young and violently. And that's exactly what happens. He dies young and violently. His body had been dipped in the river Styx, which is the river that separates the underworld from the world of the living, by his mother, who is a goddess. Her name is Thetis, and she's related to Zeus, and she's got some favors to pull in with Zeus as well. His father is a mortal man named Peleus, and this informs some of Achilles' choice of fates, but also his bitterness about those choices. Uh, and this is also how he ends up getting dipped in immortality juice, except his mom forgets to dip his heel in the water too, like she's holding on to it. So he gets coated everywhere but the back of his foot. So one day his fate comes up, it's his number, it's time to go. And he ends up getting taken out by one of the most embarrassing Trojans you could ever get taken out by. This is Paris. Paris is in the reason the Trojan War happens in the first place, the one who grabs Helen, puts her in a boat, and runs off into the sunset with her, thus sparking the hostilities that culminate in the action in this play. Also, the Iphigenia is set in the same universe. The Iphigenia is before they sail to Troy in the mythological timeline. This is right near the end in the mythological timeline. So Agamemnon's choice to sacrifice his daughter has by now led to huge piles of body and lots of dead people, about to include Achilles. So Paris is not a famous warrior. He's famous for being sexy and pretty. Homer describes him as a prancing pony tossing his mane as he struts down the hill. He's not so talented at beating people in hand-to-hand combat. But he is an archer, and keep in mind the Greek bias against archery that informs part of what happens here. Are you spitting, sir? You are. There's spit all down your front. Yep. Okay. It's enough water for you. So, Paris shoots his arrow, and then Apollo, the god, kind of goes bonk to the arrow and makes it hit Achilles in the heel. So not only does Paris shoot Achilles, but Paris, with an assist from Apollo, shoots Achilles because Paris himself is not good enough. But the arrow hits Achilles in his heel, which, as you recall, is his only vulnerable place. Achilles dies, and this sets off the action for this play. Because when Achilles dies, he dies in his fancy armor, which was forged by the god Hephaestus, the god of smithcraft. So it is very, very good armor. It's like the Dendra panoply, only times a million, and actually useful in hand-to-hand combat. And as you know, if you defeat somebody, you get to loot the body, except Paris shot him from the walls. He's already all the way over there. So the Trojans now start mobbing the body of Achilles to try to get the armor, because it's loot fight time. However, the Greeks know that they need to keep the Trojans from getting a hold of Achilles' divine armor if they want to live. And so, therefore, the two Greeks who arguably hate each other the most, or at least a lot, a very toxic environment, the Greek front lines in this battle, Odysseus and Ajax. So Ajax is, of course, Achilles' cousin, so he has a vested family interest in protecting his cousin's armor and his cousin's body. Bodies, when they were looted, were often mutilated and defiled, and it was a problem for burial. If you can't get a hold of the body, you might find yourself having to pay a ransom to get the body back for burial, and if you don't bury the body, that person isn't going to the underworld, and that is a problem. More in a minute. I have a revolt in my hands here. And we're back. So, Odysseus teams up with Ajax, and they split the work of getting Achilles' armor and body off of the battlefield. in this way. Ajax holds off the entire Trojan army single-handed with his awesome fighter skills. And Odysseus puts the body into the back of his chariot and drives it home. So Odysseus is the getaway driver, and Ajax is the dude who holds down the entire Trojan front so Odysseus can get away with the armor. Now, back at the Greek camp, there are further legal ramifications of this loot fight, because as you know, when very nice loot is dropped, and there are two people in a party, you often have to decide who gets the great loot, yes? So, oh, okay, you can have cookies in a minute. So, stay tuned for how this works out on the next slide. All right, so here we are at the quarrel. When we had last left them, Ajax had held off the entire Trojan army and gotten home safe and alive and with all of his loot on. Odysseus had driven Ajax's body and the loot home. So Odysseus argues to Agamemnon that he should get Achilles' armor because he got it back off the battlefield in possession as 9/10 of the law, and he's got the loot. So Ajax, on the other hand, argues that A, this is his cousin, B, he just held off the entire Trojan army single-handed, and C, everybody knows Ajax hated Odysseus's guts, like hated them. There's a whole scene in the Odyssey about how they hate each other. So to Ajax's mind, he is the natural heir of the armor. Yeah, he fought for it, he defended the body, this is his cousin, he's got family rights to this, like, what the hell, Odysseus? You're not even related, bro. So Agamemnon, in his usual questionable way, decides to settle this with a series of competitions. Like, he essentially makes this into a reality TV show, wherein Achilles and Odysseus both have to compete in various ways in order to establish who is the baddest of the badasses and gets to have the armor. So they're tied, effectively, and they need a tiebreaker competition. And then Agamemnon decides that the fairest way to decide this is by having a speech-giving competition. Now, those of you who aren't familiar with the Trojan War universe may not be aware, but those of you who are familiar will know that Odysseus is the one who is really good at giving speeches. It's like his thing. He's great at lying, he's great at craftiness, he's really great at rhetorical flourishes, and this is part of why Ajax hated him, right? Ajax thought that Odysseus was a squirrely little weevil who would say anything to get ahead, and that he would basically work for whoever gave him the best advantage at the time and not for honor reasons. And Odysseus probably wouldn't fight him on this. This is part of why Athena likes him, is that he is really good at strategy, both military strategy and social strategy, which are not two distinct things, really. So in this speech-giving competition, guess who wins? I mean, obviously, Odysseus wins, right? This is like if you have a contest and one of the people is Michael Phelps and it's a swimming competition, like, not a fair contest. So Odysseus gets the armor and Ajax feels humiliated. And to understand why this is so devastating to Ajax, we need to break down all the levels on which this makes Ajax question the foundation of his world. Okay, first, we're in the Homeric honor-shame world. And indeed, when we're talking about 5th century Athens, we're still in a world that centers masculinity and community standing on this idea of honor and shame, that how you look to other people determines your social capital. And in fact, we talk like this is alien. It's not. We still think like this to a certain extent. We care about how badass people think we are, how good they think we are. They care about and they care about what looks good and what suits the community standards. And in this community, winning loot is the community standard. If you don't have the loot, it's like your brave actions never even happened. And it takes away from the entire reason you're in this universe on this battlefield, is to make yourself so famous that your name will outlive you. And what Odysseus has done by getting a hold of this armor, armor that I don't think would have shamed Odysseus not to have, by the way, but for Ajax to have an interloper from outside of his family get the armor in a bullshit rigged competition is a betrayal from his commanding officer, Agamemnon. Agamemnon has set up an unfair competition biased towards the Greek that Agamemnon likes best. So Ajax has been left high and dry by the very command structure that he's fought and died and bled to uphold. So the sense of betrayal here is very real and very deep. But then also, Ajax has lost his cousin. Ajax and Achilles were very close. There's fan art of them sitting together playing chess on the battlefront. Like, they were buddies. They were bros. So Ajax is bereaved. He's lost his cousin. He's still got his brother Teucer, but Teucer isn't a full brother. He was born of a union between Ajax's father and a woman that was kidnapped and raped in the course of battle. So Teucer is kind of half noble and half not, whereas Ajax and Achilles, they are peers. So Ajax has lost his closest peer on the battlefield, and someone whose camaraderie meant the world to him. And this isn't something that's alien to us either, right? Anyone who knows anyone who's ever served in the military, especially in a combat zone, knows how tight that bond is between you and the buddy whose actions you count on to survive war. If someone you love in that way dies, and if you feel that their memory and their wishes were disrespected, and you feel like you're not being seen, that your grief isn't being felt, that is destructive. These two things together create in Ajax's mind a perfect storm that collides with honor-shame culture, because all of this is happening in public, in front of an audience of all of the Greeks, and hell, even the Trojans know this is going on. And in this moment, Ajax feels like the community that he was willing to put his life on the line to protect and to serve has disrespected his contribution, his existence, his position, and they've effectively, in his mind, and in epic logic too, in a very real way, erased what is his. And they've made his standing untenable. Like, either he has to have his vengeance to show the Greeks that they can't do this to him, or he's going to have to live with the shame of seeing every day, day by day, people who know that he had his stuff taken away from him. Now, to us, this may feel really petty, right? We, at least I hope, we don't anymore, view having our medals or our awards stolen by somebody else and take that as like a shame on ourselves. Nor do we live in a culture where we look at people who have been wronged by the system. Hopefully, actually, we kind of do, don't we? At least we shouldn't look at them and say, oh, well, you can't be that good a warrior if you let them take away your cousin's armor. But in Ajax's world, that is the reality he's faced with. So he decides that he's going to do what he feels is the only path open to him at this point, and that is to turn his awesome warrior skills away from the Trojans and onto the Greeks, that by killing the Greeks who have wronged him, he can avenge them. So at this moment, Odysseus's friend Athena, sensing trouble and knowing that she likes Odysseus and she doesn't want to see him get murdered, she causes Ajax to have a psychotic break. So for Ajax, he thinks that he's killing the other Greeks, but he's actually killing the livestock in the pen. These are Trojan livestock that have been kept by the army to feed the army, yeah. So as he's slaughtering them, and this is where the play opens, Odysseus is up on the hill and he's watching Ajax go through these animals and slaughter them. And he's saying, like, take this, Odysseus. Ah, let me stab you. I hate you. And Agamemnon, ah. And Odysseus is standing up there going, what? What? He's killing animals, but he thinks they're me. And Athena's like, yeah, bro, it was so cool. I totally made him lose contact with all reality. Aren't you grateful? And Odysseus is like, oh my god, Athena. Really? This is one of the few moments where Odysseus does indeed have the appropriate reaction. What Athena has done to the kid from Salamis is really disturbing. Not only has Ajax been betrayed by his commanding officer, but now the gods too have betrayed him. They've caused his mind to lose its connection to reality, and it's happening while his mortal enemy is watching. So it's not just that he had a break with reality, and it's not just that he's murdering animals thinking that they're his comrades, but the Greek he hates most in the world, Odysseus, is up on the hill watching this happen. So when he comes out of this state, when Athena lifts her curse, and then he realizes, not only did I not avenge myself, but I looked like a total idiot in front of everyone, and now not only do they think that I am not a good warrior and not worth having around and not worth respecting, but they also think that I am mentally unstable. And this is a universe in which there is a huge stigma against mental illness, and quite frankly, we still live in a world with a huge stigma against mental illness. So all of this sits with Ajax, and this is the rest of the play, is Ajax dealing with the aftermath of betrayal on every possible front. But it's not just about Ajax coping, it's also about Ajax's family scrambling and ultimately failing to support him, to find the words to reach him, to find ways to make him come to peace with what's happened and feel okay about himself, and Ajax's own inability to reconcile the demands of his society, especially the demands on men in this society, to rise to a level of honor and military prowess, and also a certain standard of behavior. Ultimately, he can't live with that. And he knows that if he tries to do anything to fix the situation, the gods are just going to take away his ability to perceive reality again. So he feels like he has no way forward except to do what he does, which is he takes a sword that was given to him by Hector. This is a scene in the Iliad. The audience would have known about it. He and Hector fight, and then at the end of it, they're like, bro, you're really good at fighting. And then Hector's like, bro, you're really good at fighting. They're like, bro. And then they exchange gifts. Hector gives Ajax his sword, and then Ajax keeps it as a token of esteem and respect. And this is the thing that Ajax has with him at the very end, where he's like, okay, my own side has totally let me down. I'm hung out to dry. My contributions aren't valued. The only person who really got me and respected me apparently was my dead enemy. So you know what? I'm going to do the one thing that this culture tells me I still have to do, and that is to die on my enemy's sword. And he then falls onto the sword that was given to him by Hector and thus kills himself. Meanwhile, his half-brother Teucer is scrambling to kind of hold the family together, to advocate for Ajax with a command structure that's totally not down to hear advocacy. And Tecmessa, who's not Ajax's wife, so Tecmessa, much like Teucer's mother, is a prisoner of war whom Ajax has been keeping as a domestic and sexual laborer. So we are dealing with a form of systematic rape. Slavery is involved in this too. So Tecmessa is not herself a Greek. She's a captive who was enslaved and has been in a sexual relationship with Ajax. Their young son is the son of that union. And much like Teucer's mom, she's in a position where if Ajax dies, she has nobody. She's still enslaved. She's going to be passed off to the next Greek, possibly for more abuse. And she's got a young child now who's going to be the child of somebody other than the man who now owns her. When you are an enslaved woman who has a child with your captor and then go to another household, that child is now a liability for your new owner, and that's a situation in which you could lose your kid. And that's part of what Tecmessa's grief is about. It's about her dependency on Ajax, on his inability to see her and to empathize with her position, and to come up with a solution that takes care of her and respects her. And that's part of what Toucaire is trying to do too, and part of why I love Toucaire in this play is because of whose child he is, right? His mom was like Tecmessa. So he sees her, he realizes, oh no, I'm the only ally she has now that Ajax is dead. So he goes to the Greek commanders and he's like, look, we need to have a proper burial for Ajax. You need to give him respect in death since you wouldn't give him respect in life. And Agamemnon and Menelaus are like, no, we're not. He tried to kill us all. What the heck? This was a totally legitimate contest. He just had sour grapes because of the armor, and he should have sucked it up, and he didn't, and therefore, F him. At this point, Odysseus, in a pretty surprising move, if you're familiar with Odysseus from other myths, steps up. You'd think Odysseus would be in team Ajax sucks, but he's not. He makes this really interesting and I think compelling argument that still resonates with me 2,000 years later, where he says, look, his end was bad. There are a lot of things that contributed to where Ajax was at the end, but what he did during his life utterly outweighs this last moment. You cannot argue with his prowess as a warrior, as his good faith to the Greek allies before the point where he snapped. And any one of us could end up like Ajax. Like, we're all vulnerable to reversals of fortune and to unfair command decisions. And recognizing our kinship with Ajax, we should honor him in death and bury him. And that's where the play ends, where the Greek army decides that, okay, we're going to honor Ajax for who he was before this happened. It's a really neat play. As I mentioned in other lectures, some people view this as an early staging of what we would now think of as PTSD. And certainly that can be part of what's going on. Human psychology is human psychology, and trauma and grief do indeed coincide with breaks with reality, with stress, with inappropriate overreactions and underreactions when you're in prolonged stress in a, not even in a military context. I mean, it's just a part of a human stress response. And certainly that is likely a factor that inspired Sophocles when he was thinking about writing this play and what his characters were going to be like and do. Remember, he's living in an Athens now that has a couple of generations of veterans from both Persian War II, Persian War III, scuffles with Sparta, various Athenian wars of conquest, and then now we're moving into the Peloponnesian War. So we have whole families who've been living with people who have been altered psychologically and physically by their experience with war, and also by the stress between honor-shame culture, right? This culture that expects you to fulfill certain criteria in order to be considered fully masculine, including no mental illness, which is unachievable, right? There is no human population where people do not become mentally ill, Athens included. So that's part of the anxiety surrounding the topic of trauma more broadly and combat-related trauma more specifically here. But there's a dynamic that is very native to the 5th century that connects back to this honor-shame culture. This is an ideal that is very difficult to live up to. So difficult that even epic warriors don't live up to it. Think how much more daunting it is to grow up hearing stories. Yes, Cookie, Cookie. Hearing stories about the great heroes of old and how awesome they are and why can't you be like them. That is stressful. That's anxiety producing. So as you're watching this play, it's helping the audience to think through all different levels of anxiety surrounding the warrior culture and ethos of the hoplite era. In particular, the one major change that had come between the time of epic warfare and the years of the hoplite phalanx, and that has to do with individual prowess versus group prowess. For a hoplite phalanx to work, you have to be cooperative. You have to work in a community. You have to train in a community. But on the epic battlefield, it's all about you, the warrior, and your badassery as an individual. Individual badasses don't work in a hoplite phalanx. You have to stay in line and cooperate and not go out there and grab glory, because the minute you do that, the shield wall breaks down. It's totally counterproductive. But then people are living in a society whose norms are still taken from the Iliad and the Odyssey, from this older world of combat where individual skill is prized over cooperative group effort. And that produced, I think, a specific kind of anxiety and shame and mental health crisis in warriors of the 5th century BCE. And not even one that's all that alien to us either. I think all of us have a version of shame for not living up to the kinds of ideals our culture puts on us, whether it's being able to operate better under stress, or being able to put up with being locked in an apartment for months on end, or dealing with sick relatives in a pandemic, or losing your job. There are all of these things that we have an idea of how a good, well-adjusted human being will cope with them. And when we fail to achieve that goal, especially when mental illness is part of that picture, our society is harsh on us, and we are harsh on ourselves too, oftentimes. And that's what I find relatable here. And I don't think you need to go to modern psychology to get to this place. What we have here is a universal human problem. The great gulf between society's expectations for you and your individual ability to match that. So enjoy the Ajax. I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but I hope the Ajax helps you think through some of these issues. Have a lovely week, and I will see you on the flippity flip with the Macedonian phalanx.